All right, everyone. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to introduce myself and Jazkia, who is also on the screen, and then we will get started. I'm sure we'll have some more folks joining us within the next couple minutes. So thank you again for joining us. This is our inaugural Diversity and Sustainability panel. My name is Cami Sacco, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the Office of Leadership and Community Engagement, leading Sustain Southern's sustainability efforts on campus. First, I want to thank our partner for this event, the Office of Inclusive Excellence, for their collaboration and time in putting together this panel. Specifically, Zakia Daniels, who's not able to be here this evening. She is a GA, a graduate assistant for the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and Jazkia Jones, who you also see on the screen, the manager of Inclusive Excellence Education within the Office of Inclusive Excellence. This panel truly would not be possible without each of you. So thank you both. A couple of housekeeping notes as we move through the panel. Student attendees, if you are here for either wings points or for class attendance, we will put up a QR code at the end of the panel, and that will be after the panel's the questions as well as the Q&A. So you'll get through all of the questions with the panel, and if we have any Q&A, we'll put that up and you'll fill that out. Please fill it out fully. We need all information across the columns. Throughout the panel, please put your questions in the Q&A. I will be moderating these in the end. And lastly, please join us for the remainder of Southern Sustainability Week inside the Russell Union tomorrow for our on-campus farmers market from 10 to 2. The theme of the day is public health, so we will also have educational activities around the theme from our office, as well as student wellness and health promotion. And we also have an in-person event at 4 p.m. titled The Panel for Sustainability at the Intersection of Water and Health, hosted by the Institute for Water and Health. And this event is in the Russell Union, room 280. I think that is all, unless Jazkia, I may have forgotten something. We'll go ahead and get started. Jazkia will take the reins from here to introduce our panel and move through the questions. Don't forget to put your questions in the chat, and thank you again for being here for this very important topic.
Hello, everyone. Cami, thank you so much for that great introduction. I want to add one additional note. I know that a few people may be a part of some organizations where members were planning on registering and they missed the registration open deadline. This event, as mentioned, is being recorded, and so they will be able to see the event virtually as it's posted at a later date on our websites. However, they will not get that additional piece to sign up for those wing points. And we did have some protocol around that, having a cutoff time for registration as the event started at 5. And so let your friends know if they are more interested in the conversation, they'll still get to do that. But as far as the wing points, those things will not be available. All right, so I have the pleasure of introducing our lovely 3 panelists for tonight. And so I'm going to start, and as I read off their bios, you will see them appear on the screen. And then after I read their bios, we will start our conversation and try to get as much time as we can dedicated to the topics that we want to cover today. So first, I am going to start with Michael McMiller Jr. Michael is a native of Memphis, Tennessee, where he earned his degree from Christian Brothers University in general psychology and minored in sustainability. Michael works at the Partnership for Southern Equity, where he is assisting in the build out of the youth initiative entitled Keep That Same Energy. Acronym KTSE invites young people to learn, engage, and lead in a call to action for racial equity through the lens of energy, jobs, city planning, and healthcare. Michael envisions a career in energy efficiency and solar to ensure the low and moderate income of people of color have the same access to clean, affordable, and safe energy as everyone else. Welcome, Michael. Next, we have Dr. Matthew Flynn. Matt is an associate professor at Georgia Southern University, where he teaches classes in international studies and sociology. His past work has focused on the political economy of pharmaceuticals in Latin America, especially in terms of access and human rights, culminating in his book, Pharmaceutical Autonomy and Public Health in Latin America, State, Society, and Industry in Brazil's AIDS program. More recently, he has been focused on the societal determinants of health, along with their class and racial implications, as well as on social integration and immigration after detention. He approaches the subjects of sustainability and diversity using a psychological perspective that highlights how these topics are socially constructed, but inherently contested topics, rift with inequities and relationships of power. Welcome, Matt. And next we have Bless Dupé. Bless completed her master's degree in applied geography at Georgia Southern University and currently is pursuing her PhD in geography at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, UNCC. She also works with the facilities management at UNCC as the GIS survey technician. She is interested in vulnerability to disasters and how to build resilience for vulnerable populations in disaster situations. When she is not working, she likes to go for a run and also spends time with friends and family. Welcome, Bless. Perfect. So to start off, we want to define two terms that lead this conversation. And so the way that we are looking at sustainability is defined. Sustainability is often the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability to meet the needs of the future. And this was defined by the United Nations in 1987. There are three dimensions / pillars of sustainability, which are social, environmental, and economic. Further, for diversity, definition for diversity, we look at, it refers to all aspects of human difference, social identities, and social group differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, creed, color, sex, gender, gender identity, sexual identity, socio-economic status, language, culture, national origin, religion, spirituality, race, age, disability, military, veteran status, political perspectives, and associative preferences. And this is what our Office of Inclusive Excellence defines diversity as. This is a question for all of our panelists. In your personal opinion, how does sustainability and diversity intersect? Michael, we will start with you.
Thank you. So I would say by and large that it hasn't really intersected that much over the course of my career. I say that because I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and I went to grade school as well as college there. And when I was in a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood in South Memphis, I had never heard of the word sustainability. I had never heard of recycling or seen a recycling bin and anything about the environmental movement at large. But when I went to college 10 miles down the road at a PWI where the culture was different, recycling was the norm and the standard that they practiced. Sustainability was a conversation that they had quite often. The concept of a circular economy was something that they tossed around a lot. I know that there's a difference between a collegiate level conversation, but some things were just cultural that was so normal that it was unbelievable that just 10 miles down the road, there was a completely different reality. So it took me a very long time to find diversity in this space. The first set of conferences I went to as a professional, I didn't see another Black or brown person. The few cities I went to traveling with work, talking about sustainability, solar, energy efficiency, it was very hard to find somebody of color. And when I started to ask questions, when I finally did start to meet people in that space after many years, I found that, many times the conversation was hidden in plain sight, where when recruiters had the opportunity to tell people about different pathways in college and different certifications that you can go into to find a career, that they wouldn't really tell the Black and brown students the same information. I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if that was based off interest or income levels or what the motivation behind that was, but it was very obvious that the same conversation that was given to the white kids was not given to Black and brown kids. And so the reason why I'm at PSC is to begin to have a diversity conversation. We talked about KTSC in the introduction, but also we have a grant through the National Basketball Association Foundation specifically set aside to bring more diversity to the energy efficiency space and the solar space by doing workforce development efforts.
Thank you. Matt?
Well, when I think of sustainability and diversity and how they intersect, I'd probably go for a more sociological perspective, in which I'd first ask, sustainability for who? And then we could break it down into, you know, the great definition of diversity of all these different forms of difference and identity markers, and we can highlight those groups who can enjoy a more sustainable type of livelihood and life chances compared to others who don't. And we can map that on to racial categories and racialized groups. So one thing is looking at how these intersect, and I guess another question, what would be the opposite of these two things? One thing is, hey, how do we recognize it in terms of, you know, where it happens and where it doesn't happen? I like Michael's personal anecdotes and seeing how he's experienced it. And then when we get to, okay, what's this opposite? We have to think of maybe some other type of concepts. Maybe we should think of ideas such as sacrifice. Who is being sacrificed at the expense of whom? Or a concept that I've begun to use a little bit is called social triage, where you sacrifice certain members or groups of society for the benefit of the whole. And who is this whole? Who's it made up of? And who's actually benefiting from this? And along with that, I also think, you know, we also have to think about context. Some different places will be different from others. And I do a lot of work also in terms of, you know, the global system, global relations, and there's an increased amount of work called at the global level, such as unequal ecological exchange, where you have a wealthy, predominantly white, industrialized global north, Western Europe, and North America, who engage in commercial and trade relationships with other countries that end up suffering the most from unsustainable practices, being it clear cutting forests, be it high polluting factories, et cetera. And even there, you can see a dynamic, a class, racial dynamic that occurs within these countries too, especially in Latin America, where I'm more of an expert for. So those would be some of the ways I'd be sort of looking at and trying to understand, okay, what do we actually mean by sustainability? Is it just another buzz term that's come about? Is diversity another buzz term? Or can we actually put these concepts into practice, gather information, and draw concrete outcomes and results, looking at these very distinct differences, especially as they map on certain groups that are more vulnerable, those who are lower class, those who are racialized, others, and those who end up benefit, who tend to be more looking like myself, being white, male, and from a middle and upper middle class background.
Thank you so much for that. And Bless.
Yes, so when I think of sustainability, and I think Matt did mention, he said sustainability for who? I also asked the question, what is it that we are trying to sustain? So like the example that I want to use is in case we are trying to sustain the environment or resources in the environment, or the resources in the environment, we think about people, because people are in the environment, they use resources in the environment. And so if you want the environment to be sustained, the strategies that you bring about, people are the ones who execute these strategies. So it is very important to take into account people or different systems or components. And the issue is people are not the same, people are different. People come from different backgrounds, they live in different social, physical conditions. People have different perspectives and experiences right? So if you want to build sustainable community or sustainable environment, it's important to take into account the diversity of the people. And sustainability, as the definition you gave, Jakia, the definition you gave, you are trying to meet the needs of people, present needs of people, and you're also trying to improve the livelihoods and lives of people. And so it's important that the people whose life you are trying to improve, you pay attention to their diversity, where they are coming from, their different perspectives and all that. So I see diversity as, I don't know whether to call it a vehicle or a very important component to sustainability, right? And so there is a way that they intersect, and it's important to make sure that in making decisions and policies and all that, we take into account diversity to make the sustainability more stronger.
Thank you. Thank you. I am excited to be in conversation with intelligent people like you all. Let me say that, okay? I want to share quickly with our participants, if you all are trying to have conversation with, and I think that you can, make sure that your comments are going to everyone. A few of them came straight to the host and panelist. And so if you want to be in conversation with your peers during the webinar, just make sure that your comments are going to everyone so that people can see. So we will move right into our next question. So this question is for both Bless and Michael. And the question is, who is vulnerable and where? And Bless, we can actually start with you.
Okay, so talking about who is vulnerable, I think it's very important to define what vulnerability is, because once again, vulnerability is also a very complex term used across different disciplines. So what is vulnerability? I'm interested, or my area of focus is more disaster management and vulnerability. So vulnerability to disasters. So I define vulnerability as the physical or social factors that increases a person's susceptibility to a particular hazard or threat. So if, let's say, you live in a hazardous area, right, that can increase your susceptibility to that particular hazard or threat. And that is the physical vulnerability. And then when it comes to social vulnerability, there could be social factors like, let's say, poverty that makes you vulnerable, and it increases the susceptibility. And when these threats happens, it's like you suffer more impact. So that's how I define vulnerability. And so who is vulnerable? I think the person that is vulnerable is the one who suffers the most impact of the disasters, right? So when disaster happens, or when a threat or a stress, disturbance, whatever happens, you are the one who is most affected. And some of these people in the society can be people who are economically disadvantaged, racial and ethnic minorities, and the uninsured, low income, children, the elderly. And then when you also come to maybe this health side, it could be people who live in rural areas and they have barriers to accessing healthcare services, right? And all these people are vulnerable. Looking at where they are vulnerable, I think I could say that if somebody lives in a hazard zone, you could say that that place is a place that puts the person at risk, right? And areas such as poor neighborhoods, or areas where you have pollution, and residents, areas that, let's say, rural areas where people have no access to healthcare. So these are the vulnerable people, and these are some of the areas that they live.
Thank you so much. Michael?
Yeah, I would say that we're all vulnerable everywhere. There isn't, at this present moment, another planet to go to. And the decisions that we've been making over the last couple hundred years are starting to catch up to us. And but I will say, to Bless's point, Black and brown people who live in economically disadvantaged situations are definitely disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change and the poor decision making about sustainability as a whole in this country. There's this principle of extreme extraction that exists and slavery and capitalism, and the way they treated their human capital and chattel slavery by just really extracting all possible value from the land, from the people, from the culture, from everything that they could pull from to create the capitalism structure that we know today and use, is the same principle and the same mechanisms that they use to pull energy and all the other natural resources that we have that make a really unsustainable and unsafe environment. So when you talk about people who live in Savannah, who are the Gullah Geechee people who came here 400 years ago and never integrated into society or never left that plot of land where they came off the boats. Well, they also live next to the water. And so when sea level rise happens, they'll be the first people to be flooded out. That's the same thing in Miami. That's the same thing in any other coastal place you can think of. There's a direct relationship between the way we got to the point we got to in America based off our values and ultimately how different modes of industry and how it ultimately impact the most vulnerable people who've always been vulnerable disproportionately throughout our time here.
Thank you. Thank you. For our participants, you all don't know, but I did give our panelists a strict timeline to answer questions, and they are doing amazing. So just clap it up for them there. So this next question here is directly for Bless. And the question is, can you tell us a little bit about your research and what you have found? And for this portion, I'm going to share for you all to see some of Bless's research.
Yeah, so for my research, I just wanted to show a few slides to give a visual representation of what I'm talking about. So my research was on place vulnerability assessment in coastal Georgia. The next slide. So this one is the intersection of physical vulnerability and social vulnerability to determine the vulnerability in the place. And the study area that I used for this study, I selected 6 counties in the coast of Georgia, and it's shown on the screen: Chatham, Bryan, Liberty, McIntosh, Glynn, Camden. So these were the areas that were selected, and they were selected because they are coastal areas, they have low elevation, and they are prone to these storm surge and flood and things like that. The next slide. So in determining the social vulnerability, I selected 15 variables from the American Community Survey. And these variables, I've classified it here: age, female population, race, ethnicity, educational attainment, housing, unemployment. All these variables were selected and they were used to create an index. And the index was used to create a map that shows areas with high vulnerability and areas with low vulnerability. The next, please. So with the physical vulnerability, the data was obtained from FEMA, their flood data layer, and then the one on the left is the FEMA data layer, and then the one on the right is the slush, which is sea, lake, and overland surge from hurricanes. This one actually on the right shows storm surge and shows areas with high risk to storm surge and areas with low risk to storm surge. So you can see the red areas on both maps shows the areas with high storm surge and then areas that are flood prone. So the next slide, please. With the social vulnerability, after the indices was created and mapped, areas in the Chatham County, areas like around Savannah showed high social vulnerability. And then, some areas in Liberty, Glynn, around Brunswick area also showed high social vulnerability. And let's go to the next slide, please. This is the physical vulnerability. So this is after I combined the 2 layers, the flood layer and also the slush layer. So this is the physical vulnerability, and those areas very close to the coast are showing more high vulnerability physically. The next slide, please. So the overall results, or the overall place vulnerability revealed, and I'm looking at the map on the right, that's at the census tract level. It also revealed that in Chatham County, for instance, the areas in the middle, like within Savannah, around Savannah, were very, had high social vulnerability. And what I found in the research was that most areas that had high social vulnerability were areas that had more of like the people, they were like in Savannah, for instance, there was about 24% of the population who lived below the poverty line. And then their unemployment rate was also very high, around 11. And so areas that had high social vulnerability, place vulnerability, were constantly having these issues like high, low per capita income and all that. And when you look at the Chatham area around the Tybee Island, you can see that there is low place vulnerability, and that can also be attributed to these areas are more, or the tracts in those areas, the level 1 areas, they are more affluent, right? So from my findings and from the data that I used, those areas, for instance, had per capita, like Tybee had per capita income around 42,000, and also the unemployment rate was very low, and that was like around 3.5 as compared to Savannah, which was around 11. So you could see that those conditions, like you being rich or wealthy, actually contributed to you being more vulnerable, right? So that's what I was talking about, vulnerability. People, certain conditions like the social conditions and things can increase your susceptibility to floods. So these are, I've quickly summarized my research, and that is what I found for the research. I think that is it. You are muted.
Thank you. I was saying thank you. I know that it's a very quick summary, but I think it's very interesting data. And if anyone is interested in connecting with Bless later about some of this research, then we would be happy to connect you all. This next question, moving forward, is specifically for Matt. And so to provide a little context for the question for our participants, we're going to be talking about Superfund sites, which are places where hazardous waste is dumped, including manufacturing facilities, processing plants, landfills, and mining sites. And so, Matt, can you speak about the effects of Superfund sites and how communities are actively restoring those sites?
The short answer is no. This is a new project I began collaborating with the School of Public Health, and it's great to hear about Bless's work, because it really ties into what we're looking to do some what's called community engaged research. And so this type of community engaged research is really looking at, okay, what's going on with climate change, rising sea levels, and how is that affecting people's access to clean water and their conditions in terms of what the effects of stormwater drainage, clean water, wastewater. All these things are going to be affected by climate change and rising seawaters. One of these things that we're looking at as we begin discussions with people in Brunswick is, okay, what's going to be the effect of rising seawaters on these aspects and importance of access to clean water and stormwater when you have a hurricane and other types of major types of storms coming through, and the people in Brunswick who live near these Superfund sites. And these Superfund sites are, there's a couple of them in Brunswick. And you can compare who's living in Brunswick by these Superfund sites compared to those who are living on St. Simon's Island. St. Simon's Island is very high SES, predominantly white, whereas the population in Brunswick, especially near some of these Superfund sites, tend to be more marginalized, more Black and brown people, and fewer resources in general. And so as a researcher, we're looking at make a very systematic type of study, seeing how people are responding to this, providing very scientific evidence that can be used in courts and elsewhere to see how people are responding to these issues. Such, for example, septic tanks. What happens to septic tanks when you start having increased flooding? Who's going to be at risk of different types of disease as a result of this? And those by Superfund sites, what's going to be happening when a lot of these pollutants begin to leach out? How will we find that information? And so key to this and key to our approach is a type of approach called popular epidemiology. And this is at saying that people who live there know the best. Myself as a researcher and others are just helping them systematize it, bring some additional tools and resources, and give it a little bit more stamp of legitimacy for them to make wider claims to address these types of issues. And so that's some of the research I've begun to look at, not just in Brunswick, but also all along the coast from Jacksonville up to Charleston. And we actually did make an initial visit to Sapelo Island, looking at the water issues there. Then this is once again the Gullah Geechee community, who have there in Sapelo Island have historically marginalized, and to this day very marginalized, where they have their view of what would be a sustainable form of development that would incorporate their interests, as opposed to the development at Hilton Head, where the Gullah Geechee community has just been shrunk into a couple tracts of land. And so that's some of the work that we're looking to do. Unfortunately, I don't have any results from that, but that's sort of just to give you an idea of the approach that we're taking and looking at some of the data and evidence that we want to bring in. But more importantly, a lot of the voices from those who are closest to these places, be it Superfund sites and other coastal areas that are at risk.
Thank you for that answer. And so this next question is both for Michael and Matt. And the question reads, high-level jobs in renewable energy and the sustainability sector are largely given to racially heteronormative populations, for example, wealthy white men. How do we find and create solutions to have more diversity in decision-making roles? And Michael, we will start with you.
So we have to start owning companies. We have to start asking people for stuff because they only are going to hire people that they feel comfortable with, or people that have similar backgrounds as them. When I first moved to Nashville, I was in an Uber with a guy one day, and I was in my NABSAP certification class to become a solar salesperson. And I met this guy who had just graduated from college. He's 22 years old, and he worked for a solar company. And I said, man, how did you get your own sales territory and do everything that you're doing right now, making $5 million in sales? And he said, well, I read a book about it and I thought it was interesting, and I happen to be a white male, so I got the job. So I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. That's interesting. I've been studying this in college, and all I had to do was be white and everything would work out just fine. And so, maybe that was just Tennessee. When I came to Georgia, I interviewed for another solar company, and I said, hey, man, I got my NABSAP certification. I have a degree in this. I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm ready. You give me the opportunity. He said, well, we just hired an actor who's a good friend of mine to come in, and I let him move in my house, and I trained him for 2 months, and now he's out there and he's probably going to make $100,000 this year. But I'm not so sure about. There are still some gaps in your experience. And I said, wow, I have a nationally accredited certification in this space, and he took an actor and gave him all the skill sets and tools necessary to win. What were the commonalities between those two guys? He was a white man. When I look at the data, and when we look at the data that comes from like the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, they do a lot of data about the regional workforce development efforts. Right now, 85% of all jobs in the clean energy space, including energy efficiency, solar, wind turbine, et cetera, are white males ages 47 and above. That means hardly any women, hardly any Black people, hardly any brown people, hardly anybody that doesn't fit that mold. So Those hiring managers are, I guess, inherently bad people. They're going off the directive of the owner. We need to hire people that speak our values, that look like us, that can go to customers that we are trying to go after, that will make them feel comfortable spending $50, $100, $150,000 to put something on their roof. And they're going to find people that look like them. So the only way around this is to not try to build empathy or try to tug at somebody's moral strings. We just got to own our own companies and start doing the same thing that they're doing. Hire people that looks like us, hire people that make us feel comfortable, hire people that will make the customers that we're going after find some familiarity and comfortability with. And essentially, that's really the only barrier. There is no skills gap. There is no education gap. Most of the people, I think the data says that over 50% of the people hired that work in the energy efficiency and solar space have less than a high school diploma. So this is really truly about ownership and who's making decisions to hire who they decide to hire. And that's what we have to do as Black and brown people to get into space.
Thank you, Michael. Matt?
Me, I'd be beginning to ask, okay, high-level jobs in renewable energy, what do we mean by that? Is this sort of reflective of the more wider levels of increasing inequality that we see across society with all its intersectionalities? And then begin to ask, why are certain people, white males, getting so much more money compared to, as Michael mentioned, those working in the trenches of sustainable practices? This is, I think, we have to question, why are these even happening to begin with? To what degree is that sort of reflective of these wider trends? And then maybe we could come to some types of solutions, more forms of collective action in which those who are in the trenches and doing a lot of the hard work get more resources, get more pay for their work, as opposed to a lot of consultants and others just paying to make reports that just get filed away someplace. And then, maybe some of the solutions to this, you could talk about, do you want to do a quota system? Do what South Africa does in terms of Black empowerment? Or, how can we really begin to democratize more these organizations that might affect how this labor market is sort of operating in a certain type of way to allow people more access to these positions? And then rethink, how could we sort of think about ways we could restructure a little bit the whole overall labor market so that those who are in the trenches doing the hard work, coming up with actual, realistic technologies, ways that fit people's lived experiences and where they live. So those would be sort of some of my thoughts on that. And obviously with that, more opportunities come from providing everything from more scholarships for better access to education, to experiences, and developing more forms of social capital and networks that could break down some of these class and racial barriers as well. So those would be some of the couple thoughts and ideas. What about to free up and diversify more women's labor at the home, having more men participate and having more paid daycare would allow for more women who unfortunately end up being burdened more with all the caretaking that goes on. So those are things, wider spread, I think, types of ways we could start to think about this. But I don't think this would happen unless you start having more type of stronger collective action that could translate and provide political support for some of these types of policies that would be more effective, I guess, in the long term.
Thank you both for that. And so moving right along, Michael, this is directly for you. Energy burden, as defined, is the percentage of gross household income spent on energy cost. So two-part question. First, can you give us an example of a community that has a high energy burden versus a community that has a low energy burden? And second, does the way decisions are made regarding how Georgians are delivered their electricity influence this?
After I answer the first part, I'll need you to ask me the second part again. So I'm from Memphis. Again, and we're #1 in energy burden year over year for the last 4 or 5 years. But since we're in Atlanta, most of us are in Atlanta. I'll use an Atlanta example. So if you cut across I-20, let's take Buckhead and the AUC area. The AUC area, I think that's MPUZ, if I'm not mistaken. They're the 4th highest energy burden in the country. So what's different? They both have Georgia Power. They both, let's say we have the same size home. Energy burden is significantly higher in Southwest Atlanta as opposed to Buckhead because of infrastructure, things like power lines, the people's income, and then people's housing stock. So if you go to a home and it has multiple air penetrations, or it has not been upgraded since before the 70s, and it has old HVAC unit, all those things contribute to having to generate more energy or more energy loss that would ultimately make your bill higher. So the fact that the person in Buckhead makes $110,000 a year and the person in the AUC makes $30,000 a year, when you give them, the person in Southwest Atlanta, a $400 bill a month, and you give the person in Buckhead a $200 bill a month, it's just impossible. They'll never be able to make it. In Southwest Atlanta, they'll never be able to make a full payment. And so you'll have this balance that just keeps going and keeps getting put over, and people are paying on red notices or pink notices and paying the minimum balance. And you have a situation where a year from now, somebody's racked up $1,100, $1,200 in bills that they have to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment. And that's totally due to housing stock, infrastructure, and people's income. And I guess I'll close on that point and go to the second part, if you could ask it to me again.
Okay, so the second part around that is, does the way decisions are made regarding how Georgians are delivered their electricity influence the energy burden?
So absolutely. So we have Georgia Power for the most part around here, who is owned by Southern Company, which is a giant monopoly. They generate basically all of the power that's sold in this area. And even if you have an EMC or you have another power provider, they're only a third party who is still buying power from the larger entity. So when you have an entity like that, they get to basically set the market and they get to make all decisions. And then on top of that, we have a public service commission, which is 5 seats, 5 people who basically represent our interests and hold the utility accountable. But by and large, I mean, after I don't know how many years, we've had one person of color that I can name that's ever sat on the Public Service Commission. And that person is currently in office and still hasn't done a full term yet. And you have some people who have been in those seats for 20 years. So when you don't have people who come from a certain experience or come from a certain background, their voice never gets heard in those rooms. And on top of that, the practices of how the Public Service Commission goes about taking in insight from the community is null and void. They have their meetings on a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, and the only people that are in the room all work for the company. So there's no real space to say for the people who are hurting, hey, this isn't working for me. And because they're not really interested in hearing that it's not working for you. And also they don't come from the place you come from. There's no chance of you ever getting out of that energy burden situation because nobody's advocating for you. And so that's why I exist along, like many other people, is to do something about that. To have a time where, as we go through the integrated resource plan right now, as they make a decision about what our power purchase agreement looks like, who's in that room saying, hey, we need more solar, hey, we need more energy efficiency, hey, we need to make sure that the housing stock in Southwest Atlanta gets some type of incentive so that we don't remain in the top 5 in energy burden year over year like we have been for the last 5 years. So that's the challenge, is getting in the room and having our voices being heard.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next question here is for Bless and Matt. And the question reads, can you describe the potential impacts of sea level rise on coastal communities? That's the first part. The second part is, how could these changes affect public health and access to clean water in various vulnerable communities? And Bless, we will start with you.
All right, so I think for the impact of sea level rise, I think it can impact sustainable development in coastal areas. So you have like different properties and amenities there. When these kinds of events, threats, let's say a storm and other flooding events happen, they destroy amenities. And I would say that rapid population in these coastal areas have also resulted in larger populations being affected and more valuable coastal properties being affected. So the way that sea level rise impacts these communities is by the destruction of these important valuable properties. And it also destroys people, it takes people's life as well. And the second part of the question, which is how it affects public health and access to clean water. I think that one way that the sea level rise can affect public health, one, let's say if you have flooding or storm surge or anything like that, it's puts a threat on people's life. People may drown, people may be injured or displaced in these events. And some of these events, when they occur, there are, diseases that break out. Sometimes you can have diarrheal disease going on. So I think this is a way that it can affect health of people. And also when there is intrusion of salt water as a result of sea level rise into these fresh waters, it affects the groundwater basins and the well water as well. And this can reduce crop yield and also lead to or affect the availability of safe drinking water. So I think these are some of the ways that it can impact public health and access to clean water.
Thank you for that. Matt?
So one of the potential impacts of sea level rise on coastal communities we're already witnessing is that there are some island nations that are at risk of disappearing completely. And they've been clamoring at a lot of these global conferences. It's like, what about us? We need some more concrete action before we disappear. And they are seeing it happen right here and now. Some of these island nations. And so that is a definitive risk of one of these types of impacts. Now, I mentioned before some of the stuff along coastal Georgia, but I think it's always important to bring in these global perspectives of what's happening in other places around the world. We have, major storms coming in, increasing flooding as a result of storms that are, displacing people, putting them at risk, spreading disease, as we, going into the second question of access to clean water, that allowing for different types of pathogens to infect different types of well waters, as Bless mentioned, and other types of wastewater systems, which, could put people at risk of cholera and other things. So these, I think, are major issues we're confronting as a global society, and it's happening here along Georgia. It's happened, major storms, as we already know, is ripped through New Orleans and elsewhere, but it's also all over the world where a lot of things are happening and affecting these coastal communities.
Thank you, thank you, thank you both for that. And so this is our last question of prepared questions for the panelists. If you all have any questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. We will read aloud your questions and allow our panelists to take time to answer them. We have, after this question, hopefully a good 30 minutes to have a good conversation. And so please submit your questions if you would like them to be asked. And so, as mentioned, this is for all our panelists. And the question reads, in your specific area of focus, how do you believe we can build more resilient communities? And we will start with you, Matt.
I guess working or trying to start some projects along here in coastal Georgia. I think we're looking to build some more resilient communities by, on the one hand, acknowledging and developing all the stories of, historical forms of marginalization and segregation and under-resourced, especially from state funds. These are public funds. They're not going to upgrade infrastructure, housing stock, and everything like that. I think that is very key moving forward. And encouraging more types of alliances, I guess, between academia, researchers, people in government, along with community leaders that can put more pressure on, key decision makers, those who are the key power brokers. And I think ultimately this happens through different forms of collective action, through social movements, et cetera, that can improve the relationships within a community to press and make their claims in the courts, on the streets, and in the voting booth. So this goes across many different types of areas. And I think that way we've seen kind of improvements can be made.
Thank you. Bless.
Yeah, so for me, I think that a community that is resilient is one that is able to adapt to and recover from shocks without compromising long-term respect for development. And I think it's important that to build community resilience, you tap into the local knowledge and adaptive capacities of the residents. And so when Matt was speaking in his submission, he mentioned that the people who live in the area, and the example he used was in the Sapelo area, the people who live there know their place, right? So if they are affected by any threat, they know their place. And some of these people in various communities, they have knowledge or adaptive capacities that they try to use to try to recover from some of these threats. And so tapping into their local knowledge and adaptive capacities and trying to strengthen that helps to come up with strategies that are more effective. And by so doing, you're able to bring up strategies that are more sustainable. And another thing is, I think it's important that when we are making decisions, we bring all voices to the table. Like we want to hear from diverse groups, like people that are most affected, right? Because when floods happen, as we said, we are all vulnerable, but there is something that I said, there is vulnerable within vulnerable, right? So you want to bring in all the voices of everybody that is affected and make sure that we are trying to meet the needs of all these people. And so I think of equity, not just, bringing, because sometimes diversity, think of diversity, and if you don't take care, you might learn to trying to provide equal resources. But the thing is, we are not all at the same level. Somebody is at 0, somebody is at level 1. And so we try to provide resources in such a way that try to meet the particular needs of different groups or in the population. And I think another way is to try to, like, for example, within the coastal areas, you have properties destroyed, like buildings, roofs go off and all that, trying to create better engineering systems for the buildings to make them stronger, to be able to withstand these threats, and also trying to bring disaster preparedness, educating people, providing information people, and making them aware, providing good evacuation programs, and information like that, that helps to build resilience of these communities.
Thank you for that detailed answer. And then Michael.
I think it would be equity and ownership. I think we're not going to be able to solve a problem with the same mindset and values that created the problem. So white supremacy as a cultural norm, and this belief system that we as Black and brown people continually have to be synonymous with low income or disadvantaged or disenfranchised has to stop. And I said ownership from the standpoint that also we have to get out of that paradigm as well. We got to stop looking for people to save us in many regards. I know that the odds are stacked against us, but the same value and effort that we put into other people and other systems to provide us an outcome, we can start to rely on ourselves. And that's the most resilient and self-reliant thing that you could do for yourself is look out for yourself. So I think by and large, as we start to address racial equity in this country and start to have a different value proposition and a different relationship with one another, and we can become owners in this space, then we can really start to see change and communities that are better equipped to deal with the problems that we face on a day-to-day basis.
All really, really good answers. A little calls to actions in there, right, in each of you all's responses. So thank you for that. So I know that while we are in webinar form, we can't see people giving hand claps to our panelists, but if you are in your respective spaces, just give some gratitude to our panelists for taking the time out this evening and sharing in this conversation. I really appreciated you all's responses in this conversation, and so hopefully our participants did as well. I will, as you can see, Cami is now on the screen, and so I will give this to her so that she can moderate our Q&A portion of the panel. And so again, if you have any questions that you would like our panelists to answer, please submit them through the Q&A and we will read them in this space.
Thanks, Jaskia. And yes, thank you so much to Matt, Michael, and Bless. I think this is a topic that needs more airtime, and I hope folks that are in attendance today understand that this is a crucial intersection that we don't discuss as often as it should be. So you guys can see right now we had one question and some of you guys answered it, but I'll give this to Matt as well. And if Michael, you want to expand a little bit more. And then I have a side question while folks may be thinking of other questions they might have. So Samantha Jackson asked, how would you suggest us to expand our social networks while we are in college? So I'll hand it to you, Matt, if you just want to touch on that, and then Michael, if you want to, but I know you had suggested looking into BOSS.
Yeah, with that, take advantage of every opportunity you can in terms of the networks of your professors, going to the job fairs, doing internships, developing a profile on LinkedIn. If you really know, if you're focused on a specific area, begin to look for opportunities in that area. Begin to write people directly. You'll see some people, especially, even the Georgia Southern Alumni Network would be more than happy to spend some time with you and potentially, look as developing some type of mentorship or opportunities along the way, looking for advice, looking to do what are called informational interviews. And this can, it gives a good practice for job presentations and other things. So those would be just, initially some initial steps you can do and then keep at it after that.
Yeah, I'll say volunteering, it'd probably be the best thing. I did, 4 or 5 different internships in college, and I didn't get a single job offer from any of those places, but I volunteered for about 3 or 4 nonprofits and organizations around the city, and they all offered me opportunities directly after graduation, because when you make the commitment to somebody that you can show up on time and do the work and you're not even really concerned about being paid. I know that may be challenging. And we're not talking about a lot of time, maybe an hour a week, 2 hours a week, and just making your face and your presence felt in those spaces can really be advantageous for you and beneficial for you. Because if you're volunteering and you still have to go through the same applicant pool as everybody else, at least they know who you are, and that gives you a really good shot of getting an opportunity in a space that you want to be in.
Absolutely. And shout out to the Office of Leadership and Community Engagement, which is that arm within Georgia Southern. That's where you will see a lot of the service opportunities that happen on the Georgia Southern campus in particular. So they do, Serve 912 does weekly trips into the community and just a way to meet people and maybe dive a little bit more into figuring out who you are and what you want to do and what you're really passionate about, just trying new things and just getting out there. So I have a question for Michael specifically. You mentioned in the integrated resource plan. I don't think people know what that is. So can you speak to that and what that really means for how we get our power and how that's really connected to the picture in Georgia in terms of equity and how we move forward with that?
Yeah, so about every 4 years, Georgia Power has to come before the board of the Public Service Commission and the community at large and say, based off of the amount of money we have, the trends we're seeing globally, how energy is being produced and consumed currently, how many coal-fired power plants we have, how much solar we have, how much generation we have of all kinds. This is what we propose we need to do next with our money and our time and our resource. And they allocate a plan for either, right now they're talking about how many coal-fired power plants they're going to take offline. And they're talking about how much solar they're going to bring online and what the split is on responsibility from the COVID losses that they took. We're essentially going to say that they have the ability to decide what your rate is as a customer and what part of the utility benefit you get and what part of the utility burden that you get. And so when that happens, a group of lawyers come in as interveners, some of them being nonprofit organizations, some of them being actual litigation firms, come in and say, hey, no, we would like this much of this and this much of that. And it's essentially a negotiation between the community and the utility to decide, well, to put these things before the Public Service Commission to decide what our energy future is here in Georgia. And right now we're going through it this year, and there are 4 or 5 major nonprofits actually intervening in this year's IRP process. PSC is one of them. And if you all would like to learn more about that or be a part of that, please let me know. I'll share my email and we can definitely get you a volunteer opportunity because there's a lot going on this week, actually.
I think actually, Michael, that's can you talk a little bit more about PSC? I'm sure that the students don't know much about what the Partnership for Southern Equity does, kind of who they are. We just briefly touched on it in your bio, but if you could speak to that a little bit more too, that would be great.
Yeah, so the Partnership for Southern Equity is a 10-year-old racial equity organization that was started here in Atlanta, Georgia. It was started by Nathaniel Smith. He is a fierce leader who comes from the Dr. Martin Luther King way of approaching love and equity and community and achieving the beloved community. There's this really intentional focus on racial equity. We lead with race, we talk about race, we try to make people feel comfortable with a very uncomfortable topic, and we focus on 4 areas: opportunity, which is basically workforce development and jobs, growth, which is city planning, energy, which is our climate work and our clean energy work, and health, which is mostly at this particular point focused on the disparities between health in the rural aspects of Georgia and the urban aspects of Georgia. So essentially Atlanta versus a Valdosta, or Atlanta versus a Savannah. What are the critical infrastructures that exist that underpin whether or not a person can be healthy based off factors that have nothing to do with them, but by virtue of place. And we've been doing this for the last 10 years. And yeah, it's a beautiful organization that works really hard across the Southeast to make people feel comfortable with dealing with the real, which is that race, it matters, and white supremacy as a structure exists. And it underpins a lot of our reality. And if we don't begin to get really comfortable with having those conversations, we'll never have an opportunity of living a different reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Being comfortable with confrontation and maybe some uncomfortable conversations is definitely a space that I think we all need to be able to move better into. We have a question from Brittany Holt, and she just asked, what are some simple ways I can incorporate sustainability better into my everyday busy college life? Does somebody want to take that first? And I can also add on if needed. I might be a little bit more equipped to answer that, since I kind of move in sustainability in the college space. It's not easy, but I think it just starts with simple changeovers. So, one really easy thing is, bringing your own water bottle and making these small individual choices to reduce single-use plastic in your own personal life, or making decisions where you get your food. Are you supporting local farmers? Are you supporting the local economy? And just thinking a little bit more intentionally about where your things are coming from. What are the things that you are purchasing on a daily, on a weekly, on a weekly basis, right? Everything that we get comes from the environment. Everything that we get has to get to us somehow. It has to be shipped to us. If it's coming from China or Vietnam or wherever, it has to, all of those emissions or greenhouse gases that are moved through that space, having kind of incorporating that into more of your everyday thinking and therefore your everyday actions. I think that is part of it, but then there's also a different space where we need to speak up more about holding different corporations accountable for what they're also what their footprint is, and then also holding our governments and our institutions and administrations accountable for that as well. So it's, in my opinion, it's a three-pronged attempt. There's space in every there is space everywhere for each of us to do our part. So I don't know, Matt, Michael, or Bless, if you want to add on to that at all.
I'd probably just add, the mantra, reduce, reuse, recycle at the individual level, but then also we're here at an institution of higher education, we're learning things and we got to translate those to the rest of the community. And so in that sense, be holding other organizations accountable and becoming more active and explain these things to your elected officials and to others who have decision-making power to make these changes.
All right, thanks, y'all. We'll just do maybe one more that we have, and and this can be for anybody as well. So solutions that you have seen or have been a part of regionally and nationally, which ones do you recommend? Which ones work? How do we build, a diverse, resilient community moving forward? What can we do, and what have you seen that works and that you think we should be moving towards?
Sorry, I noticed that Bless had somewhat of an answer to your previous question. So I would love to hear what you have to say as well. I seen you take yourself off mute and then muted yourself.
I'm so sorry. Thanks,
no,
Jessica.
No. I just wanted to give her a chance to answer that as well.
Yes, appreciate it.
Yeah, so that was about the sustainability, trying to incorporate that in your daily college life. So I just wanted to say that, sustainability includes conservation. So conserve water, like even it can reduce the amount of water you use in the shower. It's like basically daily things that you do. So if you live close to campus, you can try to walk to campus, or you are going to some places, you can walk instead of driving, things like that. And you can also try to join organizations in your school that is maybe sustainability organization, be part of the club and be part of the events, try to educate people on social media or whichever way you can. So basically in your daily life, try to incorporate things that help to conserve the environment and things like that. That's what I wanted to add to.
Thank you, and apologies again, I did not see you on mute. So thanks, Jessica. Okay, so solutions. What are folks' thoughts on that? And again, this is open floor, so anybody's welcome to jump in first. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so we created an initiative called the Green Economies Initiative, and thanks to the MBA Foundation and a couple of other partners that we have begun the design phase of a true two-track model where we're going to assess, train, and basically recruit the hiring agencies or the hiring managers from these solar and energy efficiency companies from around the state of Georgia to come all under one umbrella to increase the number of Black and Brown youth employed in the green economy across the board. And so I think that's a solution that we can really hang our hat on. We have the right partners. Everybody seems to be in alignment that there is a disparity here that doesn't need to be here. And so, again, to anybody out there that wants to be a part of the solution, your time, your effort, or being a part of convening around the integrated resource plan to make the demand for those jobs would be greatly appreciated. Because the more we can have people shouting from the mountaintops that they want to see more installers that look like us, the easier it will be to create that demand and for initiatives like ours to be more successful as time moves forward.
It's not necessarily a global and or a large solution, right, that people are engaging in, but something particularly, I guess, connecting the previous question and this question, when thinking about what solution you can do in a personal level, right? I think to Cammie's earlier point around researching kind of where your companies, like where you're buying and what their footprint looks like, and not just footprint in relation to sustainability, but also footprint in relation, right, to that diversity piece that we are talking about, right? Because a company may have a great green footprint, right, and not have a lot of carbon waste and things like that, but as we discussed in the panel, right, their top and or bottom employment may particularly not represent, right, a diverse population. And so I think research can really be effective in a solution because money in this very capitalist world that, right, you have to love to hate, it definitely does run kind of how systems work. And if companies are losing money because of certain things like people noticing and not funding, right, their operations, then they make those changes, right? And that's where we begin to see these companies and these organizations take it very seriously because then their bottom lines are affected. And so I think a solution that potentially can be self-led, right, is just making the quick decision to say, let me take 5 minutes to see where Shein ships their clothes, right? Or who makes their clothes or how their clothes are made, because we know that fast fashion is one of the leading, right, areas around unsustainable practices, right? And then we also know the people who are making these fast fashion clothes are disproportionate people of color who are not adequately paid. And so that's a quick research to say that outfit's cute, but let me find it somewhere else, right? And so I think these are some small pieces, right, that we can do to create solutions that we may not necessarily see in effect currently.
Thanks, Jaskia. Another question we have is, what can we do better to engage communities that have a high vulnerability?
Okay, I think I'll try to answer that. So one way of engaging communities with high vulnerability is by, you can use participatory approach. So you try to conduct research or events that allows community members to participate, for them to bring the ideas and perspective. And as I was explaining earlier, that like it's important to consider their perspective and different experiences. So trying to create the platform where these different groups in the community can come together and participate and actually learn from stakeholders, learn from decision makers, and decision makers also learn from these groups from the community actually will help with building or lowering the vulnerability of the community.
And Bless, I have sorry, Matt. I just had one more question because I know that we spoke about, right, resiliency and vulnerability, but do you have kind of operational definitions in which you, not necessarily using your work, right, but that people who are not as engaged in the work are able to address and connect with in their own practices? Oh, wait, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, so you want the definition that I use for resilience and vulnerability, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So for vulnerability, I defined earlier on that they are like physical and social factors within a population or of a particular people that increases their susceptibility to a particular threat or hazard. So a physical condition like you living in a hazardous zone can increase your susceptibility, right? And you have higher impact of a certain threat or hazard because you have certain social conditions. And I gave an example as poverty. So that's the definition that I use in my line of research. So increased susceptibility to hazard or threat, that is for vulnerability. And when it comes to resilience, disaster resilience, the definition that I use is the ability of individuals, communities, organizations, and states to be able to adapt and recover from hazards and shocks or threat disturbances without compromising the long-term prospects for development.
Thank you. Thank you. Matt, I know I interjected there. So.
No, that's okay. I love those definitions that Bless is offering. And I just echo one aspect that she was saying in terms of, how can we help those who are most at risk and most affected. And I think one thing, perhaps as academics and others, is be sure we highlight their voices, because they know what's best, they know what they need. They know how best to solve their situation. Oftentimes it's more resources, but then best defining what those are and what those objectives are. And so I think I see that in terms of some of the participatory action research or community engaged research that some of us like to do.
I definitely think you bring up a great piece. If I could just say it for a quick second. I think a lot of times people just say, oh, more resources. And then when it continues to fail, they say, well, we gave them the resources, right? And I think that that's where the mark is being missed, because to your point, right, like we're not asking what they need. We're assuming, and those assumptions, right, are based in all of these systems that are the reason why they're already disproportionate. And then we just operate in that sense, and it's not necessarily fixing that problem. Yeah, which I think is right at the intersection of what this panel is talking about, right? Like, how are we providing and creating resilient, sustainable communities, but also thinking about the ways in which resources look different per population, right, in demographic.
All right, do we have any more lingering questions? I think I think those are all the ones we have, unless Jazkia, you have any ones on your end. Okay. Well, thank you again so much to each of our panelists. As I said, this is such an important conversation that I wish we could discuss more about. Obviously, this is just a very, very tiny surface scratch of what this work is. And so if anyone is interested, it would be great maybe if each of the panelists could drop their emails in the chat. And so if people do have an interest in your work a little bit more, they can reach out. And Michael, you're free to hop on for a second. Yeah. Oh, was that an accident? Okay, got you. Okay, yeah, so looks like they're dropping their emails in, and Jazkia is going to share the QR code for the students that are interested or that do need it for Wings Points or for class verification. So we'll just leave that up for a moment, and I think we're good to go, right, Jazkia? Unless you have anything else.
No, that is all. Again, just a big thank you to our panelists. And I know, Cami, you thanked us, but I do want to extend a thank you to you for thinking of this collaboration and working with us to bring this and make this a part of you all's Sustainability Week. Hopefully everyone has been engaging with the amazing programs that Cami and her office has worked so hard to put forth for this week, and it's still going. And so just please be sure to engage with those programs as well.
Thanks, Jazkia. All right, everyone. Well, if you have filled out the form and you